The silver light from the pendant chandelier made everyone look slightly unreal, too smooth, too polished, like the town itself. Briarwood Ridge always glowed better at dinner parties, as if money could bend the hue of bulbs. Mark had chosen the restaurant, one of those farmhouse modern places where wine lists were printed on recycled cardstock and servers smiled like minor celebrities. Around us, the neighbors were already laughing too loudly, polishing their reputations between courses. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I sat between Jen Lawson and Claire Monroe, both in cream cashmere, both pretending they didn't notice how Natalie Pierce's hand lingered on Mark's wrist. I noticed. Of course I did. Pediatricians notice everything. Micro tremors in a child's hand, the millimeter twitch of a guilty smile. Mark didn't pull away. He let her fingers rest there like she owned part of him, which, in a way, she did. They had history. That's what he'd called it when I once asked if she'd be joining another of his team events. History. The air carried the clinking of cutlery and laughter from a table of investors 3 seats over. Linda, Mark's sister, had organized the dinner as a networking gesture, she said. She'd placed herself strategically near the head of the table, within whisper range of every conversation that mattered. I could practically see the satisfaction glowing off her pearl earrings each time someone praised Mark's vision for the neighborhood. I smiled when expected, nodded in rhythm, and counted the seconds before someone would make the first real cut. That's how dinners like this worked. Suburban gladiator games, handcrafted bread rolls and sharpened smiles. It happened just after dessert. Natalie leaned forward, wine glass poised, tone sweet enough to coat a knife. Mark always said he wanted a big family, she said, eyes sliding toward me. Some people are just meant for it. I could give you a child, since your wife can't. The room rippled, not gasped. Ripples are quieter, more dangerous. Every face tried to freeze mid-expression, pretending they hadn't heard, while every ear tilted closer. Mark didn't correct her. He gave that small half-smirk he used when he'd just closed a deal, when he thought he'd gotten away with something clever. For a man who lived on charm, silence was his favorite lie. I set my fork down with surgical precision and said, "Then go ahead." Not loud, not angry, just clear enough to travel across the table like a clean incision. The effect was perfect. A single beat of stillness, and then glasses lowered, napkins adjusted. The social choreography shifted. Linda coughed into her hand to hide a smile. Jen squeezed my arm in faux sympathy, already crafting the text she'd send later to the group chat. Claire tilted her head, scanning Mark the way she scanned price tags, calculating what he was worth after tax. Mark blinked, not used to losing control of the script. He'd expected tears, a storm, maybe a scene he could later frame as Caroline overreacting again. But calm ruins men like him. Calm is a mirror, and he hated reflection. The rest of the evening passed in politeness that tasted like metal. Conversation restarted in little gasps. Someone complimented the wine. Someone else commented on the new cul-de-sac landscaping. But the tension had texture now. You could feel it stretching under the linen. By the time dessert arrived, I'd catalogued every reaction. Jennifer's glance to her phone, probably to record key phrases for later. Claire's brief eye roll at Linda's forced laugh. Even the waiter's hesitating step before pouring more water, uncertain whether he'd walked into a domestic fault line. I almost pitied them. Almost. When we finally left, the parking lot hummed with whispered analysis. Mark opened the car door for me, as if good manners could patch the hole in his image. Inside, the quiet between us had weight. He gripped the steering wheel hard enough that the leather creaked. "You made a scene, Caroline." "No," I said. "I made an impression." He exhaled through his nose. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed yourself." Natalie was joking. I turned my head, watched the lights of Briarwood Ridge slide past the window. Perfect driveways, glowing porch lamps, curated hydrangeas. If that was a joke, she should work on her timing. She didn't mean it like that. Then how did she mean it, exactly? My voice stayed level. The pediatrician tone, soothing but immovable. It unsettled him more than shouting would have. He didn't answer. When we reached home, he went straight to his office and shut the door with the finality of a man convinced he still had authority. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the faint clicks of his laptop keys, probably damage control texts to Natalie, to Linda, to whoever else he needed on his side. I started the dishwasher just to give my movements a rhythm and slipped my phone from my purse. The iPad on the counter lit up automatically. It was synced to his messages. Mark had never learned the difference between locking devices and locking doors. On the screen, a message from NP popped up. "You okay?" She didn't freak out too much, did she? His reply appeared seconds later. "She'll calm down. She always does." He was right in a way. I was calm. Calm enough to photograph the message, the timestamp, and every other convenient piece of his digital trail. Calm enough to open the drawer where we kept household files, bills, property deeds, insurance forms, and slide out the folder labeled VAC Home, Joint Assets. My name was already on most of it. I'd insisted when we married. People thought I was being controlling. Really, I was just thorough. By the time Mark came upstairs, I was in bed pretending to read. He stood in the doorway like a sulking teenager. "We need to talk about tonight," he said. "Tomorrow," I answered, turning a page. "You've had enough audience participation for one day." His jaw clenched. He left without replying. The sound of his footsteps down the hall was slow, deliberate. He wanted me to feel the silence between each step. But all I felt was clarity. At dawn, I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen island while the house still smelled like detergent and quiet fury. I scrolled through our shared banking app. Numbers, transactions, patterns. He'd used the joint card for a conference weekend that didn't match any real estate dates. Hotel logo, the same one reflected in his sunglasses in a photo Linda had posted last week from Mark's investor preview. I remembered noticing the reflection then, too feminine to be coincidence. I took screenshots, labeled each one in a new folder, Exhibit A, B, C. Evidence not for revenge, but for precision. You can't dismantle a man like Mark with emotion, you do it with accounting. By 8 o'clock, he was gone for meetings. He didn't kiss me goodbye. Good. I didn't want his performance. The phone rang at 9. I recognized the number. A friend from law school, now a family attorney. I'd saved her contact years ago under Dr. Lynn, referrals, so Mark wouldn't wonder. I pressed call. Her voice came through, steady and professional. "Caroline, what can I do for you?" "I'd like to move forward," I said. "Today?" She didn't ask what kind of case. She already knew from the tone. While we spoke, sunlight spilled through the window and caught the edge of my wedding photo on the sideboard. We looked happy there, Mark and I, mid-laugh on some rented beach. I remembered that day clearly, how he'd whispered that we were unstoppable. The camera had caught the illusion perfectly. That's what photographs are for, documenting the moment before the mask slips. I ended the call and sat for a minute, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the suburban stillness outside. A leaf blower droned 3 houses down, the anthem of normalcy. Somewhere, Linda was probably already gossiping under the guise of concern. Natalie might be texting apologies Mark wouldn't read in front of me. And Mark was out there shaking hands, still thinking this was a rough patch he could charm away. He didn't realize he'd already lost control. Not of me, of the narrative. In Briarwood Ridge, stories mattered more than deeds. Whoever told the cleanest version first won. I'd just started mine. That afternoon, I drove to the practice, checked vitals, reassured anxious parents, smiled at children clutching plush animals. Work steadied me. The rhythm of care is the best disguise for vengeance. It looks wholesome from the outside. When a nurse asked if I was all right, I said, "Just tired," and she nodded, satisfied. Everyone believes the calm ones. On the way home, I stopped by the print shop, the kind with an old clerk who never asked questions. I printed copies of the screenshots, tucked them into a sealed envelope, and labeled it personal, legal. I slid the envelope into the fireproof box under my desk. Insurance against revisionist history. That night, Mark tried small talk at dinner. "Linda says she might host a wine event next weekend," he said. "Wonderful," I replied, spooning soup. "Make sure you bring Natalie. She's so good at conversation." He stared at me, trying to gauge if it was a joke. When I didn't blink, he looked away. His hands fidgeted with the napkin. His usual control faltered in small, lovely ways. He finished quickly and went upstairs, muttering something about phone calls. I stayed at the table, letting the quiet fill the house like cooling cement. Later, I walked into his office under the pretense of dropping off mail. His tablet was charging. Another synced message preview appeared. "Can't wait for next weekend. Our place." I forwarded it to my own account. No passwords broken, no dramatic discoveries, just open negligence. The kind that ends marriages quietly but completely. When I returned to bed, Mark was already asleep, breathing the steady rhythm of someone who believes problems vanish overnight. I watched him for a moment, not sentimentally but clinically, the way I'd watch a patient under anesthesia. Calm surface, hidden flaws. The next morning, I called Dr. Lin again. We discussed logistics, proof of infidelity, asset division, confidentiality. She mentioned the prenup clause, his idea originally, back when he'd wanted to prove his trustworthiness. If one partner engaged in romantic involvement outside the marriage with documentation, the other gained controlling interest in shared assets. He'd signed without reading the fine print. Charm makes men lazy. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "I will by noon," I said. She exhaled softly, half impressed. "Then, by this afternoon, Caroline, you'll effectively control the estate." I thanked her, hung up, and felt a quiet click inside me, the sound of a lock disengaging. Not freedom yet, but proximity. By the time Mark returned that evening, I had rearranged nothing visible. The house looked identical. That was the point. Power works best when it's invisible until it's too late. He poured himself a drink, pretending nonchalance. "Rough day," he said. "I imagine so." He glanced up. "You've been quiet." "I'm thinking," I said. "About what?" I smiled. "About how reputation compounds faster than interest." He frowned, probably wondering if it was an insult. It was. When he went to shower, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air smelled like rain on stone and new mulch. Across the street, a neighbor's sprinkler rotated, perfect arcs of water over perfect grass. Every house looked the same, every secret polished to match. From a distance, Briarwood Ridge was flawless. Up close, the cracks showed if you knew where to look. I sipped my wine and thought about how Mark still believed he owned the story. That was his first mistake. His second was underestimating how fast calm can turn into precision. Tomorrow, the calls would begin. Lawyer, banker, quiet account transfers, under legal clauses he'd forgotten existed. Tomorrow, the polite smiles would start to shift toward me instead of him. The same people who'd watched Natalie's hand linger on his wrist would pretend they'd always been on my side. Mark thought tonight was about me losing him. It was actually about him losing everything he built with my help. The morning after the dinner, Briarwood Ridge was already pretending not to know. That was how this town handled impact, by smoothing it over politely, then weaponizing it in private. My phone lit up twice before 7 a.m. Once from Jen, "Checking in on you, babe, here if you need literally anything." And once from Claire, "Call me if you want Pilates at 4, we can accidentally run into her. The quotation marks around accidentally did a lot of work. I didn't answer either of them. I showered, tied my hair back into something soft and harmless, and dressed like a woman who did not plan to start a small war before lunch. Light sweater, quiet earrings, flats instead of heels. You can walk into a law office in heels and look angry, or you can walk in like you're there to approve lab results. I picked lab results. Dr. Lynn's office was in an anonymous two-story of accountants and estate planners, the kind of building that understood the value of tinted glass. She met me in a conference room with pale wood chairs and no family photos. Good. You don't negotiate the end of a marriage under framed pictures of a colleague's ski trip. I read the prenup again last night, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Your husband was generous when he filed it. Or careless. Careless, I said. Mark treats contracts like cocktail napkins. She smiled at that, quick. The key clause is here. She tapped a paragraph. I already knew it by heart. Mark had written some version of, I'm never going to stray, so if I do something that stupid, Caroline should take whatever she needs so she's secure. He'd said it like a grand romantic gesture at the time. You'll never have to worry, I promise. I'll sign anything. And I'd smiled and let him. Men in love sign better terms than men in power. Women should remember that. It covers anything a reasonable person could interpret as romantic involvement, Dr. Lynn said. Not just physical involvement. Language matters. I brought language, I said, and placed a neat stack on the table. Screenshots of texts, hotel reservations charged to the joint card, a photo of Mark's hand on Natalie's bare thigh, taken from his iPad. His watch had stamped the date and time in the corner, bless Bluetooth. She flipped through the pages. Her brows lifted at one message. Our place next weekend. I cannot wait to wake up with you. Then another. Once this is handled, I can finally breathe. Then Natalie's reply. I want you to have the family you deserve. That last one is useful, Dr. Lynn said. I thought so. Caroline, she said, sitting back, this is extremely strong. With this, by the terms of the prenup, you get unilateral authority to redirect liquid joint assets, claim controlling interest in the lake property, and assert primary claim over the house here in Briarwood Ridge. I know, I said, calm. Not excited, just aligning instruments. You're sure you want to move now? He doesn't know you're doing this yet. That's the point, I said. She studied me for a second, then nodded once like a surgeon respecting another surgeon. Okay, we'll file notices quietly today. You'll need to move funds into an account in your name only. I'll send you language. And Caroline, she paused. Don't warn him, not yet. I almost laughed. He'll be the last to know. When I stepped out of her office, my phone buzzed with 3 messages from Mark. The preview bubble showed, call me. We need to talk about last night. You really crossed a line with Natalie. He'd added an extra period like he thought punctuation worked as authority. I ignored it. I had more important errands. First, Trevor. I didn't owe Trevor anything, technically. He wasn't my friend. He was Natalie's fiancé. He was also, conveniently, an adult who had walked voluntarily into the mess. But Trevor mattered for one reason. Optics. Investing men like Trevor talk to other investing men. If Trevor started talking, Mark would feel it where he actually cared. In perceived respect. I called Trevor from the parking lot in my car with the engine off, windows up, paperwork in my lap, heart steady. He answered on the second ring, voice low and tightly controlled. Caroline. That was interesting. Not hey or what is this? Just my name like a statement. I'm going to send you something, I said. I'm not giving you advice. I'm just giving you information. What you do with it is entirely your call. Okay, he said. I'm sending you hotel confirmations and messages between Mark and Natalie. They refer to future plans. They refer to our place. They refer to you as an inconvenience. You should see it. After you see it, don't call me back. We're not allies. We're just informing each other. He let out a slow breath. Understood. I forwarded him the folder. Within seconds, I heard him inhale on the other end. Not a dramatic gasp. Just a short, quiet intake, like something had clicked into place. She told me you were making things up, Trevor said softly. I don't need to make anything up, I said. This town hands you evidence if you're patient. There was a pause. She said you're unstable. Of course she did. That was going to be the party line. That's interesting, I said, considering the timestamps. Caroline, he said again, voice lower now. Thank you. We didn't speak, I said, and ended the call. That part was easy. It was always going to fall apart there. Natalie had been treating the situation like an audition for Mark's second act. Trevor had been her placeholder, which I'm sure had felt flattering to him until now. I didn't hate him for it. I just didn't care about his feelings nearly as much as I cared about his usefulness. He'd serve one purpose, removing Natalie's fallback. At 11:30, Mark stormed into the kitchen like a man who needed to be seen as in control. Tie loose, face a little too pink. That alone told me Trevor had already called. That was fast. Good. You sent that to Trevor, he said, skipping hello. I did, I said, stirring tea. Then I added, sugar, because it's important to keep the other person off rhythm. You ruined her life, Caroline, he snapped. I looked up at him, slow. Let that sit. I ruined her life? Yes, he said. He called off the engagement. She's hysterical. Do you understand what you've done to her? Mark, I said gently, no one forced Natalie to refer to you two as our place while she was wearing another man's ring. His jaw twitched. You didn't have to nuke it. Actually, I said, tilting my head, I did. You humiliated her. Oh, I said, is that what we're calling what happened last night? Her offering to provide you a child since your wife can't. That was what, a toast? He went still, anger folding in on itself, looking for an exit. You were never supposed to hear that. She went too far. I already told her that. Please don't insult me, I said, voice very soft now. You enjoyed it. You wanted the table to watch me break. I wanted you to take this seriously, he said. I am taking it seriously, I said. I called a lawyer at 9 a.m. He blinked. That detail had not been in his script. What are you talking about? He said. Infidelity voids your control of shared assets, I said. It's in the prenup, which you signed because you were being charming that month. His face shifted fast, offended, then confused, then something closer to alarm. He hid it quickly. He thought he hid it. Caroline, do not start threatening me with legal games. That's embarrassing for you. For me, I repeated, almost curious. Mark, you brought your affair partner to a group dinner attended by 2 of your investors, your sister, 3 of her closest allies, and half the HOA. She stroked your wrist while you smiled. If we're assigning embarrassment, let's at least try to be accurate. His mouth opened, then closed. He reached for a different angle. Linda thinks you're being emotional. She said you need to slow down and think instead of acting out. I smiled. Linda can rest. That surprised him. He'd expected me to defend myself to Linda like always, to beg her not to take sides, to promise I'd be reasonable. I didn't offer that. I didn't offer anything. This is not over, he said finally. Not for you, I said. He slammed a cabinet door on his way out, because he liked exits that sounded final. I let that echo fade through the kitchen while I watched his taillights disappear down the cul-de-sac. Then I sat, opened my laptop, and logged into the bank. Moving the money wasn't dramatic. It felt like paying bills. Click, transfer, authenticate, sign. My hands didn't shake. They couldn't. I do procedures for toddlers. Fine motor control is literally my job. The prenup gave me authority over certain joint accounts once romantic involvement outside the marriage was documented. Documentation achieved. Authority activated. By 1:30, a majority of our joint liquid assets sat in a new account with only my name on it. I printed the confirmation and filed it under the same calm label I'd given the rest: personal, legal. By 2:15, I'd initiated paperwork to move the lake house title into my sole name, an action also covered under the clause. We'd closed on that house 3 summers ago. Mark had called it our peaceful place, the property where we'd raise our future kids on weekends. Linda still brought it up at neighborhood brunches, like she'd picked it out herself. He loved that house for the optics of future fatherhood. I loved that house because now it was leverage. At 3, I heard Linda's SUV in the driveway before the doorbell even rang. I could identify her by the exact impatient rhythm of her brake tap. She always parked like she was arriving at a press conference. I opened the door before she could ring a second time. She swept in, perfume first, face arranged into concerned older sister. Her sweater matched her nail polish. Her gaze swept the foyer, the way realtors do when they're about to judge your staging. "Oh, Caroline," she said, exhaling in practiced sympathy. "I just had to come check on you. I hardly slept, thinking about you. Last night was so hard." I almost laughed. She'd slept fine. She'd probably slept with a smile. "I'm fine," I said. She pressed her lips together. "I just think we all need to take a breath before anything rash happens. Mark is under a lot of pressure right now, and you escalating is not going to help anyone." Escalating. Good. She'd already adopted Mark's wording. "He's going through a big deal," she continued. "It's not the time to throw extra stress at him. If you just give him a little space to work, we can get through this with dignity, and no one will have to say anything they regret." I leaned against the entry table and watched her. "You're worried about Mark's deal," I said. Flat, no question mark. "Of course I'm worried about both of you," she said, hand to chest. "Linda," I said mildly, "when Natalie told a dinner table, you could give Mark a child because I can't, did you feel worried for me in that moment?" Linda blinked. Her face flickered, just for a heartbeat. "Caroline, you know she didn't mean it that way." "She meant it exactly that way," I said. "So did Mark. He let it stand." "He was being diplomatic," she said. I smiled. "Diplomatic," I repeated. "That's what we're calling letting another woman act like an application for my position." Linda exhaled like I was the dramatic one. "You're being emotional," she said in a low voice, pitched like she was doing me a favor by telling me privately. "You always are when it comes to this topic. Kids, timing. I've told Mark for years, you just need a calmer mindset. Men can't handle—" "I'm not emotional," I said, her mouth shut. "And you should be careful using that word around me again," I added, still calm. "For your own sake." Color rose along her throat. "Is that a threat?" "No," I said. "That was advice." She looked at me for 3 long seconds, taking my measure. For years she'd positioned herself as my handler, the big sister of the Hayes family, the woman who knew how things worked. Now she was recalibrating and not liking the math. Finally, she smoothed her sweater. "Well," she said, icy bright again, "I'm just trying to help. If you start calling lawyers, you're going to make this worse for everyone." "I already called," I said. She froze. "At 9 this morning," I continued, "so you may want to update whatever version of events you're circulating." "That's a mistake," she said quickly. "That's rash. You could destroy his reputation, Caroline. You could actually cost him real standing in town. People talk, wives talk." "I know," I said. "That's the goal." Her breath caught like I'd slapped her. She recovered fast, but not fast enough. "Listen to me," she said, dropping her voice. "If you make this ugly, Mark is going to have to protect himself. He's prepared for that. You don't want to be on the wrong side of that. Do you understand?" I tilted my head. "What does protecting himself look like, Linda?" "It looks like," she said, choosing each word, "making sure people understand that you've been volatile lately, erratic. Upset. Not yourself. It looks like making sure you don't get to just run off with assets you can't even manage. It looks like keeping the home stable. There it was, the script. She'd practiced that in the mirror. Ah, I said softly. So I'm unstable now. I didn't say unstable, she snapped too fast. Yes, I said. You did. She inhaled, regrouped. Caroline, I am giving you a chance to stop this before it turns ugly, for your own good. For my own good, I repeated, smiling a little. Thank you for caring so much about my well-being. You might want to care about your own. Investors' wives don't love standing next to scandal in photos. It wrinkles. Her face tightened. You are making a mistake. Linda, I said, opening the door for her like a polite hostess, I appreciate you stopping by. She stared at me, furious and startled at the same time. Then she left, heels stabbing the front walk like she wanted to crack the pavers. I watched her go. When the house was quiet again, I leaned against the door and let the calm settle back over me like a lab coat. Linda had just confirmed something I'd suspected. This wasn't only about Mark cheating and wanting to leave. It was about narrative engineering. They weren't planning to walk out. They were planning to push me out. They had a whole story pre-written. Caroline is unstable. Caroline is emotional. Caroline is unfit to manage assets. They'd feed it to investors, to neighbors, to anyone who'd listen. By the time they filed anything official, they'd be the sympathetic ones, and I'd be the problem to be contained. That wasn't carelessness, that was intent. Good. Intent is easier to expose. By early evening, the transfers were complete, signatures done, account secured, lake house in process. Mark came home at 6, humming false normal. He still thought Linda could handle me. He still thought Trevor was an unfortunate side effect they could spin. He still thought I'd eventually cry, admit I'd overreacted, and be grateful to be worked back in. We ate together at the kitchen island because the dining room suddenly felt like a stage. He talked about permits and a small bump with an investor who'd panicked for no reason. He blamed rumors online. He used the word smear twice, like he was practicing for someone else. I nodded when it seemed polite. He didn't ask how my day had gone. He didn't ask if I'd eaten lunch. He didn't ask if I was okay. He did say, "You are not touching the lake house," with total confidence. That one made me smile. By bedtime, Mark still thought he owned a lake house. By breakfast, he didn't. Linda called it a charity showcase, but everyone in Briarwood Ridge knew it was really an audition for moral superiority. She'd booked one of Mark's newest model homes for the event. Open floor plan, pale oak floors, a kitchen designed for photos rather than food. The invitation came on embossed paper, complete with a note at the bottom. All proceeds benefit Briarwood Children's Wellness Initiative. I was one of the pediatricians listed as a sponsor, which was amusing considering I hadn't agreed to it. Typical Linda, she liked to borrow people's reputations the way others borrowed jewelry. Mark insisted we attend together. Optics, he said, as if that single word could erase everything else. I agreed, smiling just enough to unsettle him. Let him believe cooperation was submission. It always had been before. By 4 o'clock, the cul-de-sac was lined with expensive cars, engines ticking in the spring warmth. Women in pastel dresses clustered on the new lawn, balancing wine glasses, complimenting one another's shoes while scanning for weaknesses. Men hovered near the patio grill, pretending to talk business, but really talking about each other. The air smelled like fresh paint and tension. Mark walked beside me, one hand on the small of my back. It looked affectionate, but I could feel the pressure in his palm. A reminder. We stepped into the model home's living room, and he immediately peeled off toward a group of investors near the bar cart. I watched his reflection in the wide mirror above the console table. Perfect posture, hand gestures rehearsed, charm calibrated. He was performing unbothered, but the small twitch at the corner of his mouth gave him away. The man had no idea that the real stage had already been set. Earlier that afternoon, I'd visited the house while the caterers unloaded trays. Linda had been too busy bossing them around to notice me slip upstairs. The primary suite looked like a magazine spread: plush duvet, strategically folded throw, champagne on a tray. All that perfection made it easy to disrupt. I placed the props exactly as planned: the monogrammed robe embroidered with M+N over the chair, the champagne flutes etched with our first night, and a photo, carefully printed, slightly blurred for plausible deniability, of Mark and Natalie tangled in hotel bedding. Their faces weren't fully visible, but the posture was unmistakable. It wasn't fabrication, it was evidence relocated. When I came back downstairs, I found Linda near the door, rehearsing her hostess smile. "Caroline," she said, too bright, "you look wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. Everyone will be thrilled to see you and Mark together. Shows unity." "Unity," I said. "Perfect theme." She blinked, unsure whether I was agreeing or mocking her. "Well," she said, adjusting her pearl bracelet, "let's make the best of tonight." "Oh," I said, "I intend to." I took a glass of wine and began circulating, the way you do in this town when you're both participant and predator. The house buzzed with polite laughter and the sound of women trying not to whisper too loudly. I heard my own name drift through a nearby group, smoothed over with sympathy tones. I smiled. Let them talk. They'd have better material soon. At 6:30, Linda clinked a glass and announced her grand tour. "Everyone, if you'll follow me upstairs," she said, her voice honeyed with importance. "We'll preview the master suite. This is what Mark calls the heart of the build." Of course he did. Mark loved calling things hearts when they were really just showpieces. The crowd followed her up the staircase, heels tapping like drum beats. I lingered near the back, watching the investors' wives trade looks, half curiosity, half gossip hunger. The upstairs landing glowed with soft light. Linda pushed open the double doors with theatrical flourish, and there it was. The room fell into a hush so sudden it felt like the air had shifted weight. The robe gleamed under the chandelier, letters M+N looping in gold thread. The photo sat on the dresser beside the flutes, like an artful arrangement. Even from the doorway, the implication was unmistakable. For a few beats, nobody spoke. Then the whispers started, low, sharp, overlapping. "Is that? Looks like... Oh my God, is she here?" Mark froze mid-step, colour draining from his face. His jaw flexed once. Linda stared at the scene, her mouth parting like she'd walked into the wrong play. I stood behind her, sipping my wine. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else coughed. The investors' wives exchanged looks that said everything words couldn't. The men stared at their shoes, suddenly fascinated by the rug pattern. I caught Claire's eyes across the room. She mouthed, "Wow." Linda tried to recover. "Must be a mistake," she said quickly, her tone brittle. "Some kind of prank." "Yes," I said pleasantly, "an extremely specific prank." Every head turned toward me. I gave them the same smile I use for anxious parents before vaccines: gentle, reassuring, surgical. "The details are impressive, aren't they?" Mark finally found his voice. "Caroline," he said, tight, "enough." "Oh, I didn't put that there," I said lightly. "But I suppose whoever did wanted to remind us all that perfection is mostly staging." The crowd murmured, the way crowds do when truth has entered the room and they're not sure where to stand. Mark's investors exchanged polite excuses and began to drift toward the stairs. Their wives lingered, pretending to examine the wallpaper while memorizing every detail for future brunch retellings. Linda's smile trembled. "Everyone, why don't we step downstairs for dessert?" "Dessert," one of the wives repeated, dry as sandpaper. "Delicious timing." When they left, Mark turned to me, his expression a mask cracking along invisible seams. "What did you do?" "Me?" I said. "I attended a fundraiser." "You think this is funny?" I think it's accurate. He took a step forward, voice low. You're humiliating yourself. No, I said, I'm documenting you. I brushed past him and followed the guest downstairs. The murmur spread through the crowd like perfume, subtle at first, then unmistakable. By the time I reached the garden, everyone knew. The town grapevine moved faster than high-speed internet. On the lawn, the air buzzed with speculation disguised as concern. A trio of HOA wives whispered near the fountain, pretending to discuss landscaping while craning for a better look at the upstairs windows. Jennifer hovered nearby, phone angled discreetly, as if she were checking messages, camera probably running. That's when Natalie arrived. She was late, of course, late enough to make an entrance. Her hair gleamed in that careful way that takes a salon and 3 mirrors. She scanned the crowd, spotted Mark, and smiled until she noticed the stairs. Her smile faltered. I watched realization travel across her face as she caught snippets of whispered fragments. The bedroom, M and N. Picture. Her gaze darted upward to the windows, then snapped back to me. Fury, embarrassment, confusion, all the suburban sins in one expression. She crossed the grass in quick, clipped steps, heels sinking into soft soil. You, she hissed, stopping a few feet away. You did this. Define this, I said. You planted that garbage in there. I relocated items that already existed, I said. Big difference. You're sick, she said, voice rising. Heads turned. You can't stand that he's finally happy. With you, I said, calm. I don't think anyone's seeing happy right now. Don't you dare talk to me like that, she snapped. You lost him. You lost everything. You couldn't even... She stopped herself, but the word hung there, implied and poisonous. Couldn't even what, I said quietly. Her chin lifted. Give him a family. It wasn't new. It wasn't even original. But saying it here, now, in front of witnesses was bold. Foolish, but bold. I stepped closer, slow and deliberate. You wanted my life, I said softly enough that only the nearest onlookers could hear. You wanted my house, my husband, my title. Now you get my attention. She scoffed. What are you going to do, glare me into submission? No, I said. This. I caught her wrist before she could step away. Her bracelet slipped down her arm as she tried to pull back, but my grip was firm, controlled, not cruel. The crowd's chatter dimmed to a hum. Natalie's heel slid on the damp stone of the fountain's edge. When she jerked free, she stumbled backward, arms flailing, and landed squarely in the shallow basin with a splash that silenced everything. Water glittered on her designer dress. The scent of spilled wine and chlorine drifted into the night air. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then gasps, a few muffled laughs, and the soft, unmistakable click of Jennifer's phone camera. Natalie blinked up at me, dripping and furious. You... I leaned in, voice low, composed. You wanted to replace me. Now you're just entertainment. The phrase landed. I saw it in her eyes. She opened her mouth, then closed it, too aware of the audience. People were pretending to look elsewhere, but nobody was looking away. I straightened, handed my empty glass to a passing server, and walked back toward the house. Behind me, I heard Mark's hurried steps and his sharp, whispered words. Are you okay? Don't move, I'll get towels. He didn't look for me first. He didn't even glance my way. That was better than any slap. Inside, the air conditioning hit like a wave of sterility. I paused in the living room, watching my reflection in the glass doors. Perfect posture, unruffled hair, faint smile. You'd never know I'd just dismantled 2 reputations in under 10 minutes. Linda appeared beside me, pale and rattled. What did you do? She whispered. Nothing, I said. Gravity did the rest. She's saying you pushed her. She fell, I said. Everyone saw. And besides, Linda, between us, it doesn't really matter what she says now, does it? You saw how they looked at Mark. Her eyes widened slightly, understanding the shift. Reputation contagion. It spreads faster than anything. You're destroying your own marriage, she said. I'm documenting its end, I corrected. I left her standing there, mouth half open, as the noise from outside swelled again. The event would continue. Briarwood Ridge never let a little scandal stop the wine flow. But from this moment on, every conversation would orbit around what they'd seen. Natalie drenched, Mark kneeling beside her, Caroline Hayes walking away untouched. Later, after guests thinned and the night dulled into that awkward clean-up lull, Mark cornered me near the foyer. His tie hung loose, his eyes sharp. You think you won something tonight? I think I clarified things, I said. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself, I said. I just adjusted the lighting. He exhaled through clenched teeth. This isn't over. You're right, I said. It's only beginning. I walked past him into the night air. The scent of wet grass and spilled champagne hung around the fountain where Natalie had stood moments ago, shivering under a borrowed towel. She looked up as I passed. For once, she didn't speak. Smart choice. The neighborhood was already humming online. I could feel it. Pictures, texts, speculative emojis. By sunrise, everyone would know. Not because I told them, but because the truth, once visible, travels on its own. At home, I poured a final glass of wine and watched the house lights across the street blink out one by one. Briarwood Ridge slept in curated silence, each family tucked behind their identical facades. But silence here never lasted. It just waited for the next story. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself smiling faintly. Not the polite one for patients or fundraisers, but the private kind that comes when something lands exactly where you placed it. That was the moment Mark lost the neighborhood. He just hadn't realized it yet. By the next morning, Briarwood Ridge had completed its favorite ritual, turning gossip into gospel. Overnight, the fountain scene had spread through text threads, school pickup lines, and coffee shop whispers. Someone posted a Guess Who story on social media featuring a soaked blonde near a fountain emoji. No names. They didn't have to. The women of this town could decode anything faster than a forensic lab. When I pulled into the practice parking lot, the nurses looked at me like I'd stepped out of a magazine shoot, not a social scandal. That was the beauty of being calm. It confused people who wanted spectacle. I spent the day with polite smiles, steady hands, and the quiet satisfaction that somewhere across town, Mark was fielding investor calls asking awkward questions. He came home after dark, carrying the day's frustration in the way he closed the door. Too controlled, too loud. The kitchen light made his face look harsher than usual. Do you have any idea what you've done? He asked before his shoes were off. Several, I said, rinsing a cup. Which one are you referring to tonight? You've humiliated me in front of everyone. Investors are calling. They saw those photos. You turned a charity event into a circus. I didn't post the photos, I said. You might want to ask your dinner guests about that. Or maybe your sister. He ignored the jab. You made me look ridiculous. You made yourself look unstable. There it was again. Unstable. The new family script. I set the cup down gently and looked at him. That word's getting a lot of circulation lately. Did Linda workshop that with you, or are you improvising? Don't start, he said. You've lost perspective. Perspective, I said. I have perfect perspective. I saw my husband let another woman humiliate me at dinner. I saw his sister host a fundraiser for his ego. I saw him kneel to help that same woman out of a fountain while pretending he was the victim. Perspective is the one thing I haven't lost. His jaw tightened. You're spiraling, Caroline. You've been erratic for months. I've been precise for months, I said, stepping closer. You just didn't notice because precision doesn't make noise. He rubbed a hand over his face. Linda's worried about you. Linda's worried about damage control. He looked at me like I was an unfamiliar patient he didn't quite trust. If you keep this up, you're going to force me to protect myself. I have people ready to testify about your behavior. You've been off, Everyone sees it. I smiled, soft as anesthesia. Mark, if you're going to build a case against me, at least find a better witness than your sister. I'm serious, he said, raising his voice. I'll prove you're unstable if I have to. You'll try, I said, walking past him. But I'd be careful. When you start recording someone, sometimes they record you back. He frowned. What does that mean? Just professional advice, I said, and left the room. By the time I reached the bedroom, my pulse was steady again. I lay awake and thought about the word protect. In this town, it never meant what people claimed. It meant control. It meant ownership. It meant making sure someone else's version of events didn't survive. The next evening, I parked behind the grocery store at 10 o'clock. The lot was half empty except for a single sedan idling near the back. Trevor's. The air smelled like rain and exhaust. He stepped out when he saw me, jacket collar up, eyes cautious. Thanks for coming, he said. I assumed it was important. He nodded toward the passenger seat. You should hear something. Inside the car, he unlocked his phone and played an audio clip. Linda's voice came through, calm and deliberate. Trevor, I'm just trying to look out for you. Caroline's not well. She's been saying strange things, acting irrational. Mark's worried she might do something dramatic if he leaves her. We just want to make sure people know she's unstable, so if things escalate, he's protected. The recording ended with the faint click of a glass being set down. Trevor looked at me. She called me the day after the party, said she wanted to clarify the narrative before anyone got the wrong idea. I figured you should hear it. I stared at the phone for a long second. She used those words. Clarify the narrative? He nodded. They're setting you up. He's panicking. I know, I said. They always thought I'd cry and beg. They're confused because I'm working instead. Caroline, he said quietly, you realize if they get traction with this, they could ruin your reputation. Even if you win legally, socially. I'm already ruined, I said. They just haven't realized how much more they have to lose. Trevor hesitated. I shouldn't get involved. You already are, I said. But don't worry, I won't drag you into the spotlight. You've been helpful enough. He nodded. What are you going to do with that recording? I smiled slightly. Distribute it to the right audience. Not the police? Trevor, please, I said. This isn't a police town. This is a gossip town. Information spreads faster through text threads than reports. They built their empire on reputation. I'll dismantle it the same way. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, You really are different than I thought. I've had an education, I said, taught by the best manipulators in Hartford County. When I got home, the house was dark except for the faint glow from Mark's office. I watched his silhouette through the frosted glass, head bowed, phone pressed to his ear. Maybe Linda, maybe Natalie. It didn't matter. They were a chorus now, rehearsing a story that was already obsolete. The next night, around 9, I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway and the sharp rev of an engine idling too long. I stepped onto the porch. Natalie's white SUV glinted under the streetlight. The door slammed, and her voice sliced through the night. Caroline, get out here. She stood in the middle of the driveway, hair glossy, fury trembling at the edges. I noticed her phone already recording. Predictable. I walked down the steps slowly, bare feet against cool concrete. You might want to keep your voice down. The HOA cameras have excellent microphones. Good, she said. Let them hear what kind of monster you are. Monster, I repeated. That's new. Linda's been using unstable. You should sync your talking points. You think this is funny, she said. You ruined my life. You turned everyone against me. Trevor won't even speak to me. You made me look like yourself, I said. She stepped closer. You think you've won, but Mark's done with you. He's getting everything. He told me you're out of this house by next week. I smiled. Is that what he said? Did he also mention that by prenup clause, I control the accounts and the lake property, that his everything currently includes zero liquidity. You're lying. Ask him, I said. Ask him how it feels when his crazy wife quietly transfers assets while he's busy coaching his girlfriend on public behavior. Her face twisted. You're obsessed. I'm thorough. She pointed a trembling finger. You'll regret this. Everyone will know you're unstable. You'll be finished, I said. Natalie, you're already finished. You just haven't seen the paperwork yet. Her breathing quickened. You don't scare me. That's a shame, I said, stepping closer until the reflection of my porch light gleamed in her windshield. Because I should. Her hand fumbled for the door handle. She got inside, slammed it, and started the engine. The headlights flared white across my lawn. I placed my palm flat against the hood, firm, deliberate. A faint smear of lotion marked the paint. Her face flickered behind the glass, startled. I leaned toward the window. You're going to drive away now, I said evenly, and you're going to realize that in this town, the only thing more valuable than money is reputation. And yours just went on clearance. She gunned the engine and reversed hard, backing down the driveway. Curtains shifted in the surrounding houses, neighbors watching from behind blinds. Perfect. Witnesses without responsibility. When the noise faded, I exhaled slowly and looked at the row of porch lights winking on across the street. Suburbia's idea of theatre lighting. Inside, I opened my laptop and drafted a new message. The recipients were carefully chosen. Jennifer, Claire, 2 investor wives, and 1 PTA president who couldn't resist forwarding anything spicy. Attached was the audio file of Linda's voice and a single line of text. Linda explains how she and Mark are setting me up to look unstable so they can take the money. No embellishment, just context. I hit send and closed the laptop. It took less than 10 minutes. My phone started buzzing with notifications, half curious, half horrified. A few messages popped up immediately. From Jennifer, "Is this real?" From Claire, "Holy. Mark is done." From an unknown number, probably one of the investors' wives. We all heard. "She's finished. You're brilliant." I didn't reply. I poured a glass of wine and watched the neighborhood lights shimmer through the window. Somewhere, Linda's phone was lighting up non-stop, her little empire of control fracturing under its own glare. Mark texted just after midnight. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. Instead, I typed a note to myself in my phone. "Tomorrow, begin final phase. Public exposure." I closed the note, finished my wine, and smiled. The town was awake now, buzzing with the scent of scandal. They'd pretend to sympathize with Linda in the morning, of course. They'd offer her coffee and wide eyes. But by afternoon, they'd be discussing her as if she were a cautionary tale. That was how Briarwood Ridge worked. The same women who smiled through fundraisers were ruthless when scenting weakness, and Linda had just given them a feast. When I finally went to bed, the house was still. Mark hadn't come home. I didn't mind. I preferred the quiet. It was the sound of control returning. I lay in the dark and thought about Linda's voice on that recording, the certainty with which she'd said, "We just want to make sure people know she's unstable." She'd been so comfortable shaping reality. That comfort was her mistake. In this town, reputation wasn't just survival, it was currency. And tonight, I'd repossessed hers. By sunrise, Briarwood Ridge had already decided what happened. The recording of Linda's voice memo spread through every group chat and brunch circle before breakfast. No one said my name, but everyone knew it. When I stopped for coffee, the barista gave me a small, knowing smile. In this town, that was applause. By noon, Mark's investors were dropping like flies. One emailed me directly. "Dr. Hayes, we're reconsidering participation in the Briarwood project." That was suburban language for "we're out." I pictured Mark watching his empire dissolve over polite subject lines. When he came home that evening, his confidence was gone. "You've destroyed everything," he said, slamming the fridge door. Linda's in tears. The investors think I'm a liar. You are, I said, pouring water into a glass. He glared at me. You've humiliated our family. No, Mark. You and Linda did that when you made me the villain in your story. You're unstable, he hissed. Keep saying that word, I said. Every time you do, people remember Linda's recording. He flinched. You're trying to ruin me. No, I'm documenting you. He left the kitchen without another word, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt precision. The next day, Trevor met me for coffee. Mark's done, he said. Investors are pulling out. Linda's panicking. They're saying she used her HOA position to push his permits. How civic-minded of her, I said. He leaned forward. You've burned down their reputation in 48 hours. I didn't burn it, I said. I just stopped covering the smoke. That evening, Linda appeared on my porch, shoulders tight, pearls trembling at her throat. I let her in. You don't understand what you've done, she said. Mark's ruined. Then we're even, I said. She looked desperate. I was only trying to protect him. He said you were out of control. Linda, I interrupted, you recorded yourself calling me unstable. You can stop pretending you were innocent. Her voice cracked. He told me to help him. You've made him desperate. Good, I said. Desperate people tell the truth. She blinked at me, tears sharp in her eyes. You scare me. That's new, I said, opening the door. Usually you just look down on me. She left without another word. The following night, I parked outside Mark's newest model home. Cars filled the driveway, investors, their wives, and, of course, Natalie's white SUV. I waited until the chatter inside settled, then walked in. Mark's voice carried through the open space. Everything you've heard is exaggerated. The business is solid. Is it? I said, stepping into the light. Every head turned. Linda froze near the stairs. Natalie's hand tightened around her clutch. Since everyone's here, I said, let's have an honest open house. Mark's face drained of color. Caroline, this is private. Then close the doors. I placed a folder on the marble island and began to lay out my evidence. Copies of the prenup clause, bank transfers, and Linda's transcript. This is the contract your charming host signed, I said. Infidelity transfers joint assets to me. And this, I held up Linda's words, is proof that they plotted to fake my instability. One of the investors frowned. You told us she was under treatment, he said to Mark. Mark sputtered. This is out of context. Context, I said. Your sister's exact words were, we just want to make sure people know she's unstable so he's protected. That sound familiar? The wives whispered. The men looked uneasy. Linda's face went white. Mark's composure cracked. You're humiliating yourself. No, I said. I'm showing them you. He moved toward me, jaw tight. You've taken everything. You gave it away, I said calmly, when you chose lies over loyalty. The investors began leaving, silent and swift, wives trailing behind with wide eyes. The sound of their heels on the tile was the soft rhythm of finality. Mark turned on me. You think this is over? Oh, it's just beginning, I said. You built your fortune on illusion. I just turned on the lights. He stared at me, lost for words. Linda sat down hard, looking small for the first time. Natalie pressed herself against the wall, watching her perfect life tilt. I gathered the papers, tucking them neatly into my folder. By the way, Linda, I said, you might want to resign from the HOA before they vote you out. Saves embarrassment. She didn't answer. I walked to the door. The silence followed me like perfume. Expensive, suffocating. At the threshold, I paused. Mark thought the worst night of his life was losing me, I said. He hasn't realized I let him keep the worst part, himself. Then I walked out into the cool night, heels sharp against the driveway, the world behind me unraveling exactly on schedule. The next morning, Briarwood Ridge shimmered with calm that wasn't real. The gossip had reached every mailbox, every brunch group, every Pilates mat. Mark called 3 times before noon. I didn't answer once. There was nothing left to discuss. The model home was waiting for me, bright as a showroom, hollow as his promises. Cars lined the curb, investors, Natalie's glossy SUV, Linda's sedan. I walked in through the open door, and every head turned. Mark stood behind the kitchen island, sleeves rolled up, pretending authority. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Then you shouldn't have left the door open," I replied. The air was thick with tension and expensive cologne. Linda hovered near the stairs, pale and trembling. Natalie stood apart, pretending she still belonged here. "I'm here to close accounts," I said, setting my folder on the marble. "Prenup clause. Infidelity confirmed. Joint assets transferred. Everything legal, everything final." An investor cleared his throat. "We thought you two were resolving this privately." "We are," I said. "Publicly." Mark's voice cracked. "You've made a spectacle of yourself." "No," I said. "I made a record of yours." He took a step closer. "You think this makes you strong?" "It makes me accurate." I turned to the others. "Linda tried to fabricate evidence that I'm unstable. She even recorded herself saying it. She and Mark planned to use that to keep the assets in his name. You've all heard the clip by now." Linda's hands twisted together. "Caroline, please." "Please what?" I said. "Stop quoting you." The investors exchanged looks that spelled retreat. The wives leaned forward, hungry for every syllable. Mark slammed his palm on the counter. "Enough." "Mark," I said evenly, "take your hands off me." He froze, realizing how it looked. Him looming, me steady. The room's silence turned heavy. For the first time, his power shrank under fluorescent light. "You see," I said quietly, "all I had to do was let you show them who you are." Natalie stepped forward, trembling. "You're insane. You've ruined everything." "I'm efficient," I said. Her face twisted. "You hit me at the party, and now—" I closed the space between us and struck her once, clean and controlled. The sound cracked like punctuation. "That's for speaking about my body like it was a business contract," I said. The room gasped. Natalie's eyes filled with humiliation more than pain. Every wife in the room watched her with a mix of shock and satisfaction. I turned back to Mark. "You don't have me. You don't have her. You don't have Linda's cover story. And you definitely don't have your investors. I already moved the accounts and property titles. You're standing in your last asset, and even this one's a rental." He stared at me, pale. "You're cruel." "Efficient," I repeated. Linda sank onto a couch, hollow-eyed. Natalie looked away. The investors began leaving, phones already in their hands, spreading the next wave of truth. Mark's voice softened, almost pleading. "Caroline, we can still talk." "There's nothing left to talk about," I said. "You built a house of mirrors. I just turned on the lights." I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. Every step echoed. At the threshold, I looked back once. "Mark thought the worst night of his life was losing me," I said. "He still hasn't understood that I let him keep the worst part, himself." Then I left. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, smelling of wet pavement and new concrete. Behind me, voices rose in chaos. Linda's, Natalie's, Mark's, blending into one dull hum. The show home glowed too bright against the grey sky, an expensive facade, full of people realizing what ruin looks like when it wears their faces. I walked to my car, heels steady on the path, every porch light flickering on across the cul-de-sac like applause in code. When I started the engine, I caught the house's reflection in my mirror. Polished, hollow, already fading into distance. It looked exactly like the life I'd just left behind,